Hello and welcome. One of India's first supermodels, actor, cancer survivor, mother of twins through surrogacy, woman of no fixed address. That's how the blurb on her first book, Close to the Bone, describes Lisa Ray. And we're so pleased to have her on We the People tonight because her story is a brave, inspiring one of heartache and triumph, and one that we, the We the People team, believes resonates with many. So first and foremost, congratulations on your memoir. You wear many hats. How comfortably is the author hat sitting on you?
I think that this is so far my most comfortable hat / mask, you might say. I'm not a fan, and I've made it very clear, particularly during this period of time, I'm not a fan of labels. But author and writer is one that, you know, I welcome because it's something that I've aspired to do my entire life, and I know that's probably going to surprise a lot of people. I understand that, but this is the one that I think suits me the most.
You mentioned in your book that your father always said there was a writer in you.
So my father is a proper Bengali. You know, we are originally from North Calcutta, Sham Bazar, which is sort of immersed in a very, very traditional Bengali Brahmin upbringing, my father. And he really defied his family in meeting my mother, blonde, blue-eyed, Polish, during a trip to Warsaw. So I realized that my parents, in writing this book, were the original rebels. And we don't always think of our parents that way. So that was kind of a revelation, one of many different revelations while I was writing Close to the Bone. But my father also immersed me in a very sort of literary culture. You know, I call him the dreamer. He and I were the dreamers. We were aligned together. And my mother was the doer in the household. So my mother was actually very practical. She was the one who would pick up a wrench and, you know, fix a leaky faucet and things like that. And she always kind of rolled her eyes at us because, you know, our favorite thing on the weekend was just to sit and crack open a book and read. And, you know, I understand that. You know, there are doers in the world and there are dreamers in the world.
And you need both.
And you need both. I believe you need both.
You had a phenomenal debut. It was really fantastic, like something out of the movies. It couldn't have been scripted better. You were discovered at 16 and put on the cover of a magazine. Strangely enough, you had no idea that what a sensation you had created in India.
Yes, because it sounds fantastical today, and obviously the entertainment business in India has changed and transformed so much, and I've seen that from 1991, when, to be honest, a lot of the girls that I was working with, we all kind of stumbled into it. It wasn't sort of this big factory that it is today. And it also wasn't an industry that girls aspired to be a part of. It was a little bit shadowy, a little bit dodgy, a little bit unsavory as well. So it wasn't you know, it wasn't a conscious choice. I never wanted to be part of this industry. And often when people come to me today and say, well, how did you start? Do you have any tips? I always say, please don't ask me, because my beginning was so serendipitous. It was so accidental, which is why I call myself an accidental actress. But to sort of summarize, imagine I was a young girl. Of course, I loved India. I was very aligned. I felt called by India. And I came 16. I was 16. I came on a trip chaperoned by my parents. And we ended up spending time in Bombay because even though we were from Calcutta, we said, okay, we like this city. It's very liberal and modern and exciting, and let's have a change. So I was there with my parents, and just somebody literally spotted me, and they said, hey, you should model. I had never really thought about it in my entire life because my background was very different. I, you know, was set out for a career in academics. Respectful girls did not go into modeling in those days, right? So it was very unexpected, but yet I had this very adventurous spirit, and I was kind of getting bored, and I said, okay, let's do it. And I did. I was approached by Maureen Wadia of Bombay Dyeing fame, and I ended up really enjoying myself because it was a very interesting cast of characters.
But someone said to you it was an interesting phase, and I'm not sure if it's a compliment or not, because she said, you should reach, what did she say? Reach out to Maureen Wadia.
Maureen will like you because she likes these half-breeds, you know, people of mixed blood. You know, she's very sympathetic towards them or empathetic towards them. And I said, okay, well, that actually resonated with me because I think that when you are of mixed, you know, of mixed racial origins, you do end up having an interesting worldview. And as I said, I'm very aligned to India, but at the same time, I do have a slightly larger point of view because I learned Polish, I'd been brought up in Canada. So, you know, you tend to seek out people who have similar kind of worldviews. So anyways, I landed up at a photo studio, and it was my first experience. I couldn't even stand in heels. It's quite humorous, but I've written about it in depth in the book.
And that
pretty
first
much
photo shoot.
slammed into one side of the studio. I like lost my balance and hit a wall, and then tried to compose myself and went back and stood back in the middle of the studio. And then something happened. It was really interesting because you have to remember I was 16. Very insecure. I did not know who I was as a young woman.
Most people don't at 16.
Most people don't at 16. Maybe I was also a little bit hard on myself. And then, as I said, being of mixed blood, you don't know where you belong in the world as well. Because I did feel that I belonged in India, but when I was in India, people would say, who are you? Where are you from? Where do you belong? But I was getting the same reaction in Canada. So, you know, suddenly in this dark studio, wearing makeup, wearing a mask, and wearing these clothes and looking completely unlike myself, I suddenly found this great courage. And this great kind of, this different version of me came out, where, you know, I started striking poses and I started appearing very confident and very mature, which was kind of masking the real me.
Yeah.
And so that was a very interesting experience for a 16-year-old. So I enjoyed it, and I ended up being
asked. And this was the Glad Rags cover that just went
This ended up being
viral.
The insert for Glad Rags, and later on we shot the cover on another day,
in the swimsuit.
In a swimsuit, and I didn't think anything twice about posing in a swimsuit in 1991 in India, but as it turned out, it was quite the sensation, and also kind of scandalous. You know, the fact that you remember that, Sarah, and many people come up to me and remember that particular cover, I think is quite interesting and quite a testament to that moment in history in India as well.
Of course, it was a watershed moment. It probably changed things going forward for the industry, for advertising, for modeling.
It was also simultaneously the economy in India was also opening
Liberalization
up.
was
the liberalization. So we kind of ended
up
up blossoming together in a very funny way.
But when this happened, you were back in Canada and you had no idea, because you remember this was before the age of phones. You were still making STD calls abroad.
Exactly, and
yelling
screaming
into the phone. So there were no phones, no cell phones, no WhatsApp. So you didn't know, you had no clue. You were 16, you had gone back then, you had no idea that everybody in India was talking about Lisa Ray.
Exactly, and then simultaneously, of course, what happened in my family life is I was all set to start university. I had my place. I thought that was great fun in India, but I'm going to leave it behind me. One day, I'll tell my children about this one time that Mama modeled. And then in late August, just before I was supposed to begin university, my family and I were involved in a very serious car accident. We were coming back from a picnic outside of Toronto. And that one moment changed everything in my life. My life was turned on its head because my mother was very badly injured. The car flipped. I was also injured. I had a neck injury. And from this very kind of sweet, safe, idyllic family history, you know, we were experiencing this great trauma. I actually didn't know how to handle it. So my mother ended up being paralyzed.
And she never walked again
and
on
she never
her
walked
2
again
feet.
after that. And it was very difficult. As I mentioned, my mother was a doer. It's very difficult to see someone, I still feel very emotional when I think about it, to see your mother, someone that you worship, and at the same time, someone who keeps your family moving as well, suddenly stilled, suddenly confined to a hospital bed and then a wheelchair. I couldn't process it. But also, simultaneously, exactly at the same time, on the other side of the world, in India, my images were released on the cover of a magazine and I became an overnight sensation.
That's right. So ironically, when you were at one of your peaks professionally, you were at a personal low in your personal life.
Exactly.
Because your mother had been paralyzed and in a wheelchair.
If I can,
this is a really, I feel like this is a no-holds-barred, candid book, because you also talk about how you know, being a caregiver for your mom was just such a burden. Like it was a heavy weight for you to carry at 16 or 17. And in a sense, getting away to work in India was respite.
It was the excuse to put the pain behind me. You know, I thought if I move physically, then maybe I will forget some of these, you know, sort of terrible, dark memories that were haunting me. And, you know, it's natural, and at the same time I was filled with guilt, of course, and I was also trying to brush my own trauma under, you know, sort of under the metaphorical carpet. And this is something that, you know, I don't judge myself today for it, but I realized that it ended up, the thing about pain and the thing about trauma and the thing about difficulties that we go through in life is that if we don't actually face them, they never go away. Even if we physically move to the other side of the planet, even if you immerse yourself in a career where you keep busy, you know, that was actually my mantra. Just keep busy, and so I won't think about this terrible situation that I'm in. I won't see those visuals of my mother. That is literally how my career started in the entertainment business, you know. It was not me running to something, it was me running away from something.
And the other irony is that while outwardly you were considered at your professional high, you know, called possibly one of the most beautiful women in India, inwardly you were struggling with body issues and self-esteem issues.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up, Sarah, because that was another big motivation to sharing my story very candidly. I call it, you know, removing the masks, you know, and this was another mask that I felt, even in today's world, is very important and relevant to remove, because I'm talking about what happened to me maybe 30 years ago, but I think the same issues dog particularly young women, but I would also actually extend that to men.
Correct.
In the world that we live, which is so ruled by image and social media and, you know, what you see, and perfect images, images that are airbrushed and posed and, you know, beautifully curated. So basically, even though I was being celebrated and on the cover of magazines, and as I said, you know, every single day my life became this whirlwind of putting on the mask, the makeup, and, you know, and the clothes, the beautiful clothes, and being photographed and being seen at events and everything like that. Inside and in my head, I felt ugly and I felt worthless. And I actually, I tear up a little bit when I think about it even today. I might need a tissue, actually, at some point. But I'm really happy, and I feel so strongly about sharing this because I see women go through it, and women who are so beautiful. Because today, when I look back on myself, of course, I see, thank you so much. I didn't expect this. I see beautiful women. I see a lot of beautiful women and fabulous, handsome young men with your whole life in front of you. And when I look back on myself, I think, wow, you know, that was a pretty young girl who was very lost, but very pretty. And I just felt worthless. I constantly had this critical voice inside me. You're not good enough. Look at your face. Your face is too fat. You know, you must lose weight. Or you don't look like so-and-so, comparing myself to some of the other beautiful gazelles around me, like Meher and Madhu, yes, yeah. And, you know, it was a very iconic era for models, I think, during that period of time. They were all very beautiful. And I think that, ironically, we were all probably if you opened our minds and looked at our thoughts, we were probably going through the same thing, this deep insecurity. And then we're also dealing with kind of this very patriarchal kind of a filter, that a woman is expected to be perfect, you're expected to look a certain way, to carry yourself a certain way. Also, we have to remember in the 90s, we didn't speak openly about a lot of the patriarchal attitudes, and I was also seen as a sex symbol, which was a strike against me in those days, right? As a sex symbol, you can't possibly be smart, for one. Probably maybe your value system is also questionable, you know, which for me was not the case. And I was still a very brainy, shy, introverted Bengali girl who also wanted to be recognized for my mind and what I felt I could contribute to the world. You know, my writing, I was always writing and taking notes and things like that. And nobody ever asked me about that. And it even extended also to my career when I was offered roles in Bollywood in those days. It was actually mainstream roles in you know, all the sort of celebrated directors of those days were offering me roles. I didn't want it. I just couldn't see myself gyrating with Govinda. Call me silly, but it was not what my soul craved to do. You know, I would have loved to be part of a Shyam Benegal film. Shyam Benegal was not going to approach me And I was, again, offered the choicest of roles and a lot of money. And, you know, I'm sure people considered me foolish, and maybe today people still consider me foolish for having said no. But that was the one thing I had in my power, was to say no.
You had agency over yourself. You know, as a mother of two girls, then what message would you give to your daughters? Because your mother had so many struggles with you when it came to eating food.
Yeah.
She used to pack you a snack box and used to throw the soup into a neighbor's potted plant.
Yes, yes, because I was struggling, of course, with anorexia and bulimia, which was a side effect, obviously, of my self-esteem issues, having very low self-esteem. To be honest, Sarah, I hope that my babies don't, you know, become a version of me. I gave my mother such a hard time, you know, and you only realize that when you become a mother. And yeah, with my girls, I think that, you know, in certain ways the world has become gentler, and in certain ways much more difficult. And by gentler and maybe more accessible is we have a voice. And, you know, the good thing about social media, the tool of social media, is that we can compare stories. There is a place where we can shed our masks and say, this is what's going on inside me, and I don't believe in this, and I don't believe in body shaming, and I don't believe in, you know, that I should be judged simply on my appearance. So that's good. The terrible thing about it is, yeah, the image of women that are put out there, that it still persists in social media. It's a very tricky path to navigate, I think, for young women. I want to tell my girls, you are beautiful as you are. I want you to look inside, to develop your self-esteem and your self-love, and know that you don't have to look for love outside you. You are worthy of love. That love will come to you when you love yourself. And your voice, challenge, always question. Don't just accept the accepted narrative. Don't just accept what society tells you, what you should do, who you should be, how you should dress, what you should do in your life. Don't just accept that. And I say that also for boys, for men. Men, by the way, and we don't discuss this, we don't get a chance to discuss it as much, men also are sort of the victim of a particular narrative. Don't cry, be strong, you have to be the provider, you have to, you know, like there's all this long list of expectations also on young men. I say challenge it, find your own inner voice, always ask questions, and fortunately, create a tribe of people around you. You will know by how you feel around certain people. If people don't support you, if people are constantly criticizing you in a way that makes you feel small and not worthy, they are not friends, I promise you.
Talking about your professional career, I think the one word, you know, dancing with Govinda, as you put it, but the one word
and
that
full
describes...
respect to Govinda, let me say.
Absolutely.
I love his films and I love him. I just couldn't picture myself gyrating. I'm not a good dancer, yaar.
So, you know, the one word I think that would describe your professional career would be serendipity. Shekhar Kapoor,
yes.
Shekhar Kapoor came up to you while you were jogging on the beach.
Yes.
And you didn't take up that offer.
No, and we became friends much later on down the line.
But did you know what you were turning down?
I wasn't completely aware.
He had just directed Mr. India.
Exactly. But all I knew is that I actually didn't want to be part of this business. I mean, modeling still as a stepping stone was okay because
but you did
I'm
it later
I'm
on.
an introvert.
You did take up films.
I ended up taking up films
why
much
would you not
later.
take up a Shekhar Kapoor film?
I agree. I'm a fool. I'm a complete fool. But having said that, I was 16. That was just before I started modeling. I was horrified at the idea of actually acting, you know, because I'm an introvert. I'm very shy, and I still stand by the fact that I'm still an introvert. And the way that I define introvert versus extrovert is an introvert can appear to be an extrovert. Obviously, I'm very comfortable here and talking to people, and I really genuinely enjoy it. But if I'm around people all the time, I'm drained. I need then my quiet and my silence.
Got it.
And an extrovert gets energy from people. You know those people, you see them at parties and you always have a friend like that. They are on, but it's not that they're on, they're actually deriving a lot of energy and they love being the center of attention. I do not.
No, but so in this particular episode, you were just jogging on the beach. This guy comes up to you.
Yes. And he said, you know, have you ever thought about films? And I kind of gave him a look. And in those days when I was jogging on Juhu Beach, you know, men used to sometimes stare. They would stare at me in a very unpleasant way. And I was a young girl and I was wearing a jogging suit, but I was very disturbed by this. So what I used to do is I used to do the hand in the sand movement. I would like reach down and I'd pick up some sand and I'd say, "Halt! Don't look at me like that." You know, like I was quite fiery that way. So when I heard this guy calling me, I thought, oh no, here's another creep yard. And I was getting ready to toss a handful of sand in Shekhar Kapoor's face. So I kind of like whipped around and said, "What do you want?" And I was like ready to do this. But you know, I saw him, he's kind of, you know, this very fine looking gentleman and everything. So something made me stop. He wasn't looking at me in a dodgy way. And that's when we had this exchange. But I think I was just so young. I was so shocked by the offer to be a part of film, something that I'd genuinely never considered in my life, that it was more shock than anything.
And there were many
else.
offers. Sanjay Dutt wanted to do a film with you. He was at his peak. And you obviously had the brush with the Oscars, Water. And there's the audition for the James Bond film. You made it, they were the last three, that was the final round. So it was 1 out of 3 women, and then that didn't happen. I got a sense of, you know, heaviness when I read that chapter, a bit of like, you know, what could have been. Is that
That's interesting. That's interesting that you got that. I honestly believe, as I've gone through life and as I look back, and even in the moment, that getting into full steam mainstream cinema was never for me. Because I do believe that writing is my calling. And in order to be true to myself, because this book has not just come out of nowhere. This is the culmination, I like to say, of 25 years of observation, of taking notes. Note-making. And my husband can attest to that I've got boxes and because we move so much. So he's like, when are you going to get rid of these boxes and boxes? They come with me everywhere. So because I need my space and because I can't constantly be around people, I think that consenting really to be really wholeheartedly a part of films, both in Bombay or in Hollywood, was never for me. Having said that, of course, there was a part of me that regretted it. But there was always a part of me that is separate from all of this, the watcher. You know, I can sort of be in a situation and be watching it separately. And so,
in a sense, also the outsider. Because of your mixed
outsider, and I'm
parentage.
always the outsider, always watching myself. So even though it's kind of a very classic situation or experience to be in, to make it to the top 3 of Bond, I had actually, when I sat with the Bond executives in the Sony studio, I'd actually said to them, I'm really sorry, I haven't ever seen a Bond film, especially the latest one. I chose truth. And fortunately, in that situation, it worked in my favor. It hasn't always in my life. But I think they were kind of disarmed by that. And I stand by that. Of course I knew about the Bond films. It just isn't my genre of film that I'd actually sat down and watched one. After that, of course, I went and I watched the Daniel Craig Bond film, naturally. And after that, I fell in love with Daniel Craig, and that obviously led to me not getting the part. Because I was so completely thrown by his presence when we actually did the final audition that I ended up commenting on his shoes and acting like a complete fool. And I stand by that today. Of course, I came out of that going, oh my God, what did I just do? For sure I haven't got it. But that's okay, it's par for the course. You know, I do believe that every experience in life, I honestly today, because of my experiences perhaps with Buddhism and a lot of my other personal spiritual journey and perhaps just my own worldview, I don't label things in life as good and bad, you know, necessarily like, oh shit, that didn't happen, or this is wonderful. I see it as an experience, as something to, you know, sort of derive joy from and something to learn from. And so that's how I personally see all the experiences that I've gone through in life, you know. They're not necessarily bad, it's not necessarily a failure. I mean, yes, you know, you could say the final audition was a failure, but I honestly don't see it that way. Because for a girl who never in the first place ever thought of being in films, it was quite fantastical to find myself, because of serendipity, because of the great force that has actually moved things in my life, because of serendipity, I found myself in all these extraordinary circumstances.
And you would say the same about cancer? Because you said in that first blog, it's a place from which to combine survival and celebration. Are those just words? Is that what one is expected to hear from people? Because, you know, of course, we know Lisa Ray has challenged the taboos, the silence that we hear around cancer. Often when someone finds out that they have cancer, they choose to go silent. You, on the other hand, went public with this disease in your blog, The Yellow Diaries. And that first entry was on 7th of September, 2009. Why? What made you write that?
That's a really great question. And the reason why I wrote Survival and Celebration is because I had known, just leading up to my diagnosis, I had understood that there were many things that I needed to change in my life. I needed to change my lifestyle. I needed to become more true to myself, to stop running away. And this maybe actually links back to the earlier traumas in my life. So my way of handling pain and trauma and difficult circumstances was to run away. And finally, cancer was such a definitive experience and diagnosis that it made me stop. There was no way of running away from this. I had to stop and confront not just the cancer diagnosis, I had to confront myself. I had to sit and look at myself in the mirror and say, this is who you are. Now what are we going to do about it? And of course, I had to, I mean, I was in a health crisis, so I had to obviously follow my doctor's orders, and there's an entire experience with that. But cancer for me ended up being an opportunity to address all the unresolved issues and questions deep inside me, if I would survive. So the priority was survival. And after that, it was an opportunity to remake myself entirely. Now, I don't recommend this to anybody else as a lifestyle change. It was an extreme. But I have been an extremist in my life, as I touch on in my book. I was an extremist in everything that I did. So perhaps I needed an extreme kind of a message to change my life into a wholesome, healthy, more grounded life.
So you wrote this blog, it got picked up, it made it to the national papers all over India. You then became one of the first celebrities to openly talk about this disease. There's also a lot of humor in this book, or I don't know if it's self-deprecating, because when the doctor first told you that you had cancer, you then asked him, are you okay, would you like a glass of water? Did you honestly believe that, you couldn't be harmed by cancer?
I didn't. It wasn't about yes, I have to answer that. Yes, I did honestly believe that I would not die. I knew it was not going to be easy. I knew it was going to be a difficult path. And I have no other way of explaining it on a rational level except it was sort of a gut reaction. So that was one thing. And then secondly, he looked so nervous, the doctor. And I think that he was really sort of dragging out the prognosis. He was speaking very slowly. He was saying, you have multiple myeloma. And then he paused because I think he expected me to burst into tears. And then I didn't. So he got very nervous. So he said, it's a very serious disease. Pause. Now you can cry. But I still wasn't crying. So he was getting very, very nervous. And I sensed that. And I knew that I was a very strange bugger. And I was because of course I do think that a part of me had gone into shock, but another part of me had kind of left the room and gone into that sort of place that I go into where I'm watching the situation unfolding in this small little doctor's office. So that's why I offered him some water. He looks so nervous, poor chap.
but you say in your book that you're not cured. You say you're a survivor. And I think 23rd June is the anniversary of a diagnosis that's coming up.
Oh my God. Thank you for reminding me. Thank you so much. Yes, it's true. That is the anniversary of my diagnosis. And it is technically an incurable blood cancer. And I have relapsed once after this.
So how do you decide to bring two kids? Your husband's also here. How do you decide to bring two kids into the world when you know, as you put it, you're not cured? You're a survivor.
You're absolutely right. Perhaps someone can view that as very selfish. In my mind, I believe that I'm cured because I also believe in the power of the mind and our belief system. And now, even since my initial diagnosis, I have relapsed once. So I've gone through another journey with that, where I've incorporated a lot of other complementary healing modalities, like nutrition is very important, and Ayurveda, and all of these philosophies now.
And that's ironic. Life comes full circle. Everything you scorned as a teenager, you're now embracing wholeheartedly.
Everything my mother told me to do, I have gone back to, and this is what happens. But it is incurable on a, technically, and also on a statistical level. But I do not believe that I'm a statistic. I do not believe that I'm a dot on a graph. And I say that to myself like a mantra sometimes, And I do not believe that any human being is, strictly speaking, a dot on a graph. I believe that we can defy the statistics. And that science doesn't tell the whole story. Science is very important. I'm very grateful to all of the treatment that I've had.
And science is what you took. That's the first part. We want to be clear about that.
I want to be very clear that I followed a strictly conventional allopathic treatment, and that is also one of the reasons why I'm here today. But along with that, I believe in healing beyond the body, which is mind, spirit, and also complementary therapies.
Sure.
And also I'm a little bit stubborn, and I think that that has actually come in very handy in my approach towards the disease. And I also want to add that my disease, multiple myeloma, we have made great strides in the last 10 years.
Yes. But this is a very serious issue, so I want to just touch upon it a little further. You also mentioned about, how lucky you were to be in Canada, for example, where health insurance is picked up by the government. And you talk about how much more difficult it is, of course, if you were in India and for Indians, and how there's a taboo over here. We have women who, we have such high rates of cancer right now.
Yeah.
Mastectomies are something nobody wants to talk about.
Yes, until Taira Kashyap has recently gone public with that, and kudos to her.
A lot more people are speaking up now, but you were among the first to do that. You're using your fame now for cancer advocacy. You also walked the red carpet. That's how you announced to the world that you had cancer.
Yes, bald as well. It was a breakthrough moment for me. And I think because I had always been ambivalent and uncomfortable with the scrutiny kind of required by my business, and particularly the red carpet culture, I actually feel is very insidious, because you're put on that red carpet and you are scrutinized from every angle, and you're criticized as a woman, and you're too fat, or you're too skinny, or your shoes are not right, or your hair is not right, or your makeup is not right, and fire your stylist. And we get, so much criticism. And 2.5 hours or 3 hours has gone into creating that image. So it's not real. Nobody actually looks like that. And yet somehow women today aspire to look like that. It does not even exist in real life. So I'd always been very deeply uncomfortable with that. And then I was newly diagnosed. I was on steroids. I had gained 40 pounds. I'd never gained 40 pounds. And steroid weight is very strange weight. I had like a little buffalo hump on the back of my, my neck, and my face became a moon face. It became very, very round. But I was saving my life. So you're going to do anything to save your life. It wasn't about vanity suddenly anymore. Then I was asked to walk on the red carpet to promote a film at the Toronto International Film Festival at that time. And so I had a choice. I had to confront it. Either I could hide and make an excuse, or I could actually use this very public moment to finally talk about something that was very meaningful to me personally, and could possibly reduce the stigma around speaking about cancer openly. And I always had India at the back of my mind, because I always consider myself an Indian first and foremost. And so I said, you know what, I have to do this. And fortunately, I had a lot of support, even though there were a lot of people around me who were telling me, don't do this. This is, first of all, going to be career kamikaze. And why do you want to put yourself in that situation? And not that many people had actually done that before that. So they were being very protective. They just didn't know how people were going to react. And fortunately, I said, I'm going to remove this one mask. And for me, personally, who I was at that time, the truth was easier than hiding. So this became this incredible breakthrough moment, this incredible homecoming. And what I mean by homecoming is I was coming home in my body. I was able to stand on the red carpet. I'm going to get teary again. I was able to stand on the red carpet, 40 pounds overweight, and say, this is who I am. Take it or leave it. I'm very proud of who I am. And yes, I'm going through cancer, but cancer also doesn't define me. The same way that the red carpet doesn't define me. I have an inner spirit to share, and I have something to say. And I want you to listen to me, not just look at me. So it was a very emotional moment.
Because you have the strong
Thanks,
chapter.
Sarah. You're making me cry so much.
You have this strong chapter because you say this is the message. You want to be an advocate.
Yes.
For cancer
for
awareness.
cancer, particularly in India.
In
where
India, because it's one of the most feared, misunderstood diseases.
Yes.
It often, the connotation is death when you hear cancer.
Yes.
Patients are judged. Patients are isolated.
Exactly.
So what would you say to anyone? So, you know, support caregivers, families
Yes.
of someone who's struggling with cancer.
That's really
What would you say to
significant
them?
as well. We also don't discuss caregivers, so that's very significant. But I just very quickly also wanted to say that today I also believe that the quality of care that we get in India is equivalent, can be equivalent to international standards, but you have to advocate. And of course, the finances are a huge issue. And that's an ongoing issue. I today have my own oncologist in Bombay, so obviously my treatment and my care is all out of Bombay. But in India, that's what I feel very strongly about. We just have to keep talking about it, which is why even 9 years after having been diagnosed, I still continue to talk about it. Because there's so much misinformation, there's fear, there is taboos about this. So speaking and awareness is fundamental. We have to create an ecosystem. You know, where we are, because there are good programs and outreach programs in India which will support patients emotionally, which will support patients financially. But the problem is putting people together with those programs, creating an ecosystem. It's a big undertaking. So you have to know that it's not necessarily a death sentence. Preventative is very important. And that you are not going to get help unless you ask for it. There is no shame in being diagnosed with cancer. That cancer, for me, I have come out the other end a stronger and a better person. I lost my hair came back. It's a big issue for a lot of women. And I would say that as women, put yourself first when you're going through cancer. You have to, there's a reason perhaps why you've been diagnosed, and that's to put yourself first. As Indian women, we always put everyone else ahead of us. You need to put everything aside and accept the care from others. And it's a very difficult disease, I'm not saying that, but certain cancers are absolutely treatable, you know, and it'll just be something that you have to pass through. But let's continue the dialogue around cancer. I mean, I'm sitting here today, I got through it.
Let's make it a dialogue. Let's get some audience reactions. I can see somebody wants to ask you a question.
Hi Lisa, I'm Natasha.
Hi,
and
Natasha.
I'm a writer. And I lost my mom last year to multiple myeloma after a 4.5-year-long battle. Yeah, so I was one of the caregivers. What I want to understand from you is what is it that you did differently? You spoke about Ayurveda, you spoke about working with your mind and allopathy at the same time.
Yeah.
But what really worked for you? Is it that willpower that you had that you wanted to live? Because somewhere with my mom, I saw that she kind of lost her willpower towards the end. So.
Thank you so much, Natasha. I'm very moved, and thank you for sharing as well. It's a very complex disease. It's a very almost, I know when I was diagnosed, someone said to me, listen, this is a marathon, not a sprint, because sometimes also there's so many conditions and various things that you have to think about. It's overwhelming. I wish that I could tell you. I don't have a definitive answer for why I'm sitting here and your mother is not. And that is, you know, I mean, there are many things in our lives that are mysterious, you know, including cancer, including diseases. And there's no exact formula that will say, this is why one person got through it, this is why another person got through it. But perhaps you have touched on something. There was somehow or the other an inner will, a stubbornness, perhaps also. I had also been experimenting deeply with Tibetan Buddhism that had shifted my perspective on my own mind. It had given me certain techniques of how to handle fear, how to address fear, how to get distance from fear. The fear never goes away. I'm not a fearless person at all. But I have techniques of handling the fear. And also of being able to actually have a relationship with death. And that's something we don't talk about. We're very scared of talking about death in modern society. And in India in particular, I find it ironic because we have many techniques in our traditions of talking about fear, of understanding that we are much more than this bag of bones, as it were. So I had been doing a lot of those practices before, ironically, just before I was diagnosed. So again, maybe it's serendipity at work. Maybe there was something preparing me for it. But I'm afraid I don't have a definitive answer. Having said that, today I'm much more conscious of my health. I put my health first. And I do mix, as I said, many different techniques. We are living in a world today where we have a lot of information about complementary therapies. I don't want to call them alternative because I'm still on medication. I still take a very, very strong medication every single day, and I will for the rest of my life, combined with steroids. And I won't stop doing that. But along with that, of course, I'm very particular about what I eat. I'm very particular about, I watch myself when I'm getting overwhelmed, I take a break. You know, Ayurveda is very important for me. But I'm also a mother, so I also, you know, I do get stressed out. I cannot, you know, sit on a mountaintop as well because I've chosen to be part of the world. So it's a very stressful world that we live in. I would also actually say that stress is one huge factor that we don't talk about or highlight. Is a big contributor to a lot of lifestyle diseases, including cancer. I am still ambitious and driven, but I will do it on my own terms.
That said, also, a lot of us don't have the resources.
The resources or the
agency, but you meant, you know, like you said, you're a mom now, you're a mom to two wonderful girls, and this is via surrogacy. You not just had the proverbial, you know, body clock ticking away, it was the gong going off in your head when the doctors, because like you said, you are on medication and you're going to be on medication for the rest of your life and steroids.
And that's why I wasn't able to carry babies myself, because of the medication that I'm on.
And you tried surrogacy first in India?
I did. You know, my ideal would have been to have our children via surrogacy in India, and we had initiated the process. And about a week before we were supposed to begin, India banned commercial surrogacy. And I do understand the rationale behind it, but I do question it because it is literally throwing out the babies with the bathwater. Surrogacy in India needed to be regulated. For sure, there was a lot of abuse of the system, but there also were a lot of legitimate, very good agencies that were able to help, you know, infertile couples. And so I really questioned the decision, to be honest. It was heartbreaking. And we struggled a lot with it, me and my husband. And then finally, we had to go to an agency, an international agency, and my babies were finally born in the Republic of Georgia, which is actually a beautiful country. I really recommend it. And it turned out to, touch wood, it was a very good experience because surrogacy is legal. They have a very good medical system, and it was also very reasonable. It wasn't extremely exorbitant either. So now
you had that option. A lot of women in India don't. You know,
a lot of women in India
are now working.
Yeah,
and you know, we put off marriage and kids until 35,
and it should be your choice.
And
today.
You wake up, and then you find out that, you know, maybe IVF, IUF, all of that's not working.
And I would have loved adopting as well. You know,
and the choice is taken away.
And the choice
from
is taken away
now.
from you, and that, I really question that.
So
I would question.
It puts pressure on women to have kids earlier when maybe you don't know who you are, and or maybe you're not ready for kids.
And you're not ready for it, or you know, and you're in the midst of your career, and even I'm talking about as a couple. A lot of now couples are moving to, you know, away from the joint family kind of configuration, and you're living alone in the cities, and you're both working, and it's so hard. And once you're financially stable, is a time when it may be much more difficult to have babies. And I really question this decision, and I hope that our government will actually start questioning it as well, and perhaps, you know, looking and not repealing that particular decision for women, for Indian working women of today, so that the choice comes back to you. It really is a matter of choice. And to be honest, also the surrogate, as long as everything is done in an ethical way, even the surrogate is actually a beneficiary, a financial beneficiary of this setup. And that woman also gets a reprieve and gets a certain amount of money that she also can actually put to good use in her life.
I can see a We the People topic coming up on this. It's about time we need to do
Call
this.
me
Go
in,
ahead.
I would love that.
Hello, ma'am. My name is Preetika. I'm a student. I've read about your story. I've seen what pain you have been through and what exactly you would have been through while you were having your daughters. So can you tell us what exactly it was to feel the pain which you were actually facing in your life and the other part of happiness which you wanted to have?
Thank you. It wasn't so much pain in terms of wanting, desiring to be a mother. Let me also establish, my children came into my life when I was 6? How old was I? 45, thank you. 45. I'm bad with numbers, okay? I'm a creative type. So, I became a mother at 45, and I do understand that's unconventional. I'm not advocating it. I'm not saying this was my personal choice, and again, I believe it should be the choice of the couple or the woman in particular. It wasn't so much pain, but it was determination. I took a lot of determination. It was very expensive. Look, I'm not also, yes, I mean, I have certain financial resources, but I'm not exorbitantly wealthy either. I'm also a working woman. I'm a working mother today. So we had to think about it because, when the option of having our babies in India, which would have been also much more special for me, to be honest, to have my babies born in India, the country that I owe the most to and that I'm the most connected to. When that was taken away from me, I was really upset. I was angry. It was a very, I didn't know who to be angry at, to be honest. The system or the government or even my doctor as well. I was angry at a lot of different people. It was very frustrating. My vision of life, the way that I've seen life, it's not always the most talented, qualified people who get really far in life. It's the most determined people. It's the most persistent people. You have to be able to be knocked down and then get back up and say, you know what, no, I still believe that I can make this happen. And maybe I'm also delusional. I am what I call delusionally optimistic. And that has actually come in very handy. Of course, my babies are the joy of my life now. I don't completely define myself by motherhood, but I am so happy, and I was ready for motherhood then. I would not have been what I want to highlight as a woman. In terms of my life choices, I was not ready to have babies before that. I don't think it would have worked out as well as it's working out now, because I'm a very different woman today.
And much more center. Well, talking about qualify, you haven't been to college.
No.
You did theater studies later on in life.
Yes.
But this
I'm
is interesting.
Completely uneducated.
You also did something that was probably not all right, like a lot of us have done when we were young. You wrote essays for university students as a high school student. So basically, university students would pay you to write their essays through which they would get their degrees. But there's a message in this, you say in your book. It taught you an important lesson that education is not so much about learning, you say, but it's also conforming in order to get a piece of paper and validation from the world. Talk about that. In the context, in India, with college admissions, there's so much pressure.
Yes.
And then on the other hand, there's your story, but not everybody can have the same story. And maybe we do need, qualifications, we do need that degree in that context.
Of course, because I came from a very academic background, and
you were very bright even in school.
I was very bright, and I really thought that I would be in academics. That was my view. Nobody in my family had ever come from this strange business, And at the same time, often I found, because I was a little bit questioning and rebellious, I was always a fairly good writer, a strong writer, so I would experiment with my teacher. I would say, if I wrote an essay, the way that I knew it would appeal to the teacher, I would get an A. And if I wrote an essay where I knew I was being original, creative, questioning, challenging, I would not get such a high mark. So this kind of provoked me to keep challenging the system. I said, what is this education? Is it actually about learning? Is it about the joy of learning? Because I consider myself a lifelong learner. I'm completely uneducated, but I am a learner, so I'm self-taught. Whereas the education system is about getting these qualifications so that you can be fit into a profession. Today, the way the world is, it isn't about just learning, because we can just Google everything. It isn't about mugging things up anymore, is it? Right?
Correct.
We have information at our fingertips. What it is about creating a well-rounded individual who can think creatively, who is good at creative problem solving, who also has some emotional IQ. I mean, the world at large, we're living in a crisis situation, right? The world, the environment, everything that we're seeing around us. How are we going to solve this? It's up to you guys, the next generation. You are going to have to think creatively. You're going to have to stand up to the system and say, I don't accept this. This is not how I think the world should run. But it's terrible in India today. And I'm not saying, I think that qualifications are fantastic. If I had a chance, maybe I would have done it differently. I would have gone back and studied something I love. But something I love wouldn't have necessarily also led to a job. There's so much pressure about also getting the right degree that leads to the job.
All right, let's give the last word to Jason, your husband. He's joins us here today. Jason, you're married to a woman, obviously, who's always had a voice. She's found a voice. She speaks out openly. Tell us something about Lisa. She says, you know, we should look up to real-life heroes. From her story, we can see that she is one herself.
She's definitely a real-life hero. She's, in many ways, my own hero.
Oh, no.
She's the most inspirational woman that I've ever met. And, you know, the gift that life has given us, these two beautiful girls, and she mentioned that, you know, she hopes that they wouldn't follow her, you know, maybe that's true for her teenage years. We can skip that part, but I'm just so, you know, looking forward to our two girls learning from Lisa's experience and, you know, learning from strong women that are in our life. And in today's world, there's so much, even, you know, the image-conscious world that we live in today with social media. Having that support system is that much more important. And I can't wait for them to be old enough to read the book. I'll start reading them, you know, reading to them
Chapters
at night.
now?
Chapters at night.
I don't know if that's a good idea.
But, you know, the one thing that I would want to touch on is what Lisa, you know, has that very few people know about, and that we all have within us, is that faith in life, that life is for you. Regardless of what crisis you face and what challenges, if you maintain that center that life is for you, then you see it as part of the journey. That no one is immune from illness, no one's immune from tragedy. That it is part of the experience, that there's something to be gained from this. And Lisa mentioned that she relapsed, and we were married. It was actually 2 months after we were married when we found out that she had relapsed. I was a mess, but she just, you know, there's an inner strength, there was an inner knowing about her that got her through it, and she took charge of it. She wasn't passive at all. We adhered to the medical protocols that her oncologist provided, but she also took it upon herself to change her lifestyle, to change her diet, to allow her system, to her immune system, to fight the disease for her. When patients, you know, experience a relapse and they ask why, yet they haven't changed anything about their life, you know, it's kind of, you have to take responsibility as a patient. You can't just take the medication and change nothing about your lifestyle. And I'm hoping that, you know, in one of the books that that Lisa will write in the future is owning and taking responsibility for your health.
Thank you for being an advocate. This is a show, We the People, where we believe it's important to speak your mind, but it's also important to listen. So it was wonderful to have you on the show tonight.
Thank you so much, Sarah.
Thank you all.
I loved it. Thank you.